Welcome to the final challenge of intermediate months. So we've got this first table here which is looking at the actions that customers take. So if we look at, say for example, this first flight here, maybe this top customer there, then we can see that this customer booked first of all on the 1st of December 2023, and then they later cancelled it on the 24th of December 2023. And it's interesting we chose a customer there that has cancelled, in fact, so we need to filter out these customers who have cancelled so that they're not counting towards the capacity of that flight anymore. So if we add in a clean step and we filter to just the actions which are cancelled, and then we only really need then the flight number and the customer ID of those cancelled flights. So that we can filter the rest of our dataset to exclude these customers and these flight numbers from our dataset. So we join this back onto the step before. We make sure that we're joining not only on the customer ID but also on the flight number as well, because we don't want the customer's flights, other flights being affected. So maybe they booked one flight and they've cancelled that one, but they've booked another flight. They don't want that one to be cancelled too. So we want to make sure that we're matching those two fields up. And we want to make sure that we're doing a left unmatched join only. So basically taking out the inner join part and only returning the part before we filtered to just the customer cancelled customers, sorry, so that we're excluding basically those 204 rows of those cancelled customers. That's what we're hoping to do there. The reason that we have more in the excluded here, the 585 rows that we're losing, that's because the customer has a few more actions taken before they cancel their flight. They can't cancel their flight without having first booked it, for example. So that's why that number of rows is higher than this 204 that we see here. So we're expecting a smaller number of rows than we had in our initial data set. So we start off with about 1,699, and then after this filter, we end up with 1,114. Just checking I can read numbers there. So then we have only left over in our data set now customers who have not cancelled their flights, and we can just get rid of the extra fields that this join has created, the flight number -1 and the customer ID -1. So we just don't need those fields anymore because they're both nulls, because we're leaving behind all that information about those customers who cancelled their flights. Now we want to filter this dataset to only find the most recent action of the customer. So whether that was they booked or their seat changed or they upgraded, then we just want the most recent action basically. So we use an LOD to create that. So we go to the date field and we go to the menu there, and we say create calculated field fixed LOD. And let's just open up what that looks like. So we're taking the maximum date, so the most recent date, and we're making sure to group that by each flight number and each customer ID so that we can tell what their most recent row of data is. So if they've upgraded or changed their seats, then we're only keeping the most recent information about each customer after we are able to filter. So if we look, for example, let's go back to well, we can't go back to that original customer because they cancelled. But for example, let's choose one that has a few more rows that might be slightly more interesting. Let's choose this customer here. Then we can see that this customer has booked, they've upgraded, and they've changed their seats. So we only want to keep this final row here, this most recent row, so we can see that their most recent action date was on the 28th of February, and therefore we only want to keep the row where the date is the 28th of February. So then we write a custom filter just to say that the date is equal to that most recent action. And now we've only got 491 rows, so that's just all the seats that have currently been booked on all of those flights. Okay, so that's good. Where we have multiple rows for each customer ID, that's hopefully going to correspond to that customer being on multiple flights, and it's looking like that's the case when we check a few of these, which is good. So that's what we'd expect to see. But generally we can see that we've got quite a uniform data set here. Okay, so now we can calculate how many seats have currently been booked over time, corresponding to that date. So we're adding in a quick field here which just puts a number 1 against every single row, because every single row is one customer having booked. And then we're going to do something a bit interesting with that. We're going to go to our menu here, we're going to create a calculator field, and we're going to create a running calculation, in fact. So let's see how that looks when we pop open the visual editor. So we're calculating a running sum of the number of seats based on the date field, so ordering by the date field, and we're grouping it by our flight number and our class. So for example, we can see that this flight number PA001, first class, we can see the first seat gets booked on the 3rd of December, and then the second seat gets booked on the 19th of, December, not November, and that's just going to add up all of those kind of number of seats that we have there, which is just 1, and it's just creating a running total for us so that we can see those seats getting booked over time. Okay, and then we're bringing in the flight details as well, so the capacity of each of the flights for each class. So we're making sure to join not only on the flight number, but also on the class as well. And we're changing the join type to be a right join, so that, for example, there are no seats booked on flight PA001 for economy. So we want to make sure that that row of data still comes through, but we'll just need to change that total number of seats booked from a null to be a 0. But before we do that, we just merge together a couple of fields, because we'll have then 2 flight numbers, for example, we'll have 2 flight dates, and we want to make sure that we're keeping the field that has no nulls within it. Same for class as well. And then for the date field, this is a bit further on in the challenge what it explains that we need to do with it, but we need to say if that date is null, so for any of those rows where there were no seats booked in a particular class, we just want to make that date be today's date, so the 28th of February 2024, for example, as in that's today's date. You can see that I'm filming this in the past, so that is not in fact today's date. But yeah, so that's how that will update there. And then we're just making sure to make that capacity field, the number total seats booked over time be a 0 rather than a null value like we discussed. And then it's easy to calculate that capacity as a percentage, so the total seats booked over time divided by the total capacity of that class. And we can see that becomes a number between 0 and 1, which is good for percentages. We know that it is going to be calculating correctly if we're getting kind of between 0 and 1. We're not having an overbooked flight in this case, although that can be common in the airline industry to overbook a flight. At least Preppin isn't doing that. And then we're outputting the data after that. So hopefully that was a fun challenge. Hopefully it wasn't too tricky. And thank you very much for watching.